The prairie stretched wide and endless, golden grass rolling under the wind like an ocean of fire beneath the late summer sun. It should have been a peaceful morning, a time when wagons rattled westward with the hopeful creak of wheels and the laughter of families dreaming of land, freedom, and new beginnings. But for Clara Dawson, that morning would forever carve a scar across her heart. Her family's wagon train had splintered during the night. The river had swallowed the bridge they were meant to cross, and half the group had pushed on while the Dawsons lagged behind to repair a broken wheel. Clara's father believed they could catch up by dusk, but as the hours wore on, unease crept like shadows across the land. The plains grew too quiet. Even the birds seemed to vanish into the sky. It was then that the riders came. At first, Clara thought it was a dust storm, a haze rising from the horizon. But no, within moments the thunder of hooves shattered the silence. A band of painted warriors burst from the hills, their cries slicing through the air, bows raised and spears glinting. Her mother screamed, clutching Clara's younger brother. Her father reached for his rifle, but the wagon was surrounded before he could fire. The ambush was swift and merciless. Arrows thudded into the wagon's frame, splinters flying. Her father shouted for Clara to run, but her legs froze. A warrior leapt onto the wagon bed, his hand gripping her arm like iron. She fought, clawed, but his strength overwhelmed her. Around her, chaos reigned. The shouts of men, the terrified cries of horses, the clash of wood and steel. And then, silence. When the dust settled, Clara's world lay broken. Her father's rifle lay abandoned in the dirt. Her mother wept, clutching the lifeless body of Clara's brother, while the warriors bound Clara's wrists with leather thongs. They did not kill her, though they could have. Instead, she was pulled onto the back of a painted pony, her pale dress torn, her hair whipping wildly in the wind as the raiders wheeled their horses toward the horizon. Her last glimpse of home was her mother's tear-streaked face shrinking into the distance, her screams lost in the roar of hooves. The journey to the camp was a blur of exhaustion and fear. They rode for hours, the land transforming from rolling plains into rocky outcrops and hidden valleys. The warriors spoke little to her, their eyes sharp and unreadable. She felt like a trophy, a captured deer meant to be displayed before the tribe. Every mile carried her deeper into an unknown world, farther from everything she had ever known. When they finally crested a ridge, Clara saw the camp sprawled below, a sea of hide tents, smoke curling from fires, children darting between, horses, women grinding corn and tending to hides. The sudden normalcy of it all struck her hardest. This was not just a war party. This was a village, a people, a life. The raiders rode in with their prize and all eyes turned to her. Women whispered, some with curiosity, others with scorn. Children pointed at her pale skin, her tangled blonde hair, laughing as though she were a strange animal brought in from the wild. Clara lowered her gaze, cheeks burning with humiliation. She was led to the center, before the council fire where the elders sat in solemn judgment. An old man, his hair white as bone, studied her with eyes that seemed to see deeper than she wished. He spoke in a tongue she could not understand, his voice calm yet commanding. The warriors answered with gestures and words, and though Clara could not follow, she knew her fate was being debated like a commodity at market. At last, the elder lifted his hand, and the camp fell silent. His words, though foreign, carried a weight that made the hairs on her arms rise. When he finished, a cheer rose from the warriors, while some women shook their heads in disapproval. Clara was dragged to a small tent at the edge of the camp. A crude prison made of poles and rawhide. Night fell heavy and cold. She huddled in the shadows, wrists still bound, the smell of smoke clinging to her hair. Fear pressed on her chest like a stone. Would they trade her for guns? Keep her as a servant? Or worse? But through the tent flap, she caught a glimpse of him, a tall warrior standing apart from the others, his face half-shadowed by firelight. His gaze lingered on her longer than the rest, not with scorn or mockery, but with something she could not name. And though Clara could not yet know it, that look would change both of their destinies forever. The first days in the camp were a blur of fear and disorientation for Clara. The people spoke in a language that rolled sharp and fast, impossible for her to follow. The women who brought her food, mostly scraps of cornmeal or dried meat, looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. Children sometimes crept close to poke at her pale skin or tug at her yellow hair, laughing as though she were some strange bird blown in from the prairie winds. But through it all, Clara felt another pair of eyes on her. Eyes that did not laugh or sneer. The warrior. He was not the oldest among them, nor the youngest. His presence was quiet but powerful, like the steady drumbeat beneath a war song. His shoulders were broad, his hair bound with leather, and his movements carried the silent confidence of a man born to fight and survive. Yet when he looked at Clara, something in his gaze softened, something almost human in a world that felt so cruel. The first time she noticed him, he was standing just beyond the firelight, arms crossed, watching as a woman set down a bowl of food inside her tent. He didn't approach, didn't speak. He only looked, then turned away as quickly as he had come. Clara told herself it was only curiosity, nothing more. But the way her stomach twisted whenever his eyes found hers made her doubt her own words. In the evenings when the men gathered around the council fire, Clara would sometimes see him seated apart, listening more than speaking. His wife, yes, she had learned quickly that he had one, often sat near him, her back straight, her face proud. The woman's eyes were sharp as blades when they caught Clara's. She needed no words to convey her meaning. You are nothing here. Stay in your place. Still, the warrior's gaze returned. Not always, not often, but enough. Enough for Clara to feel the strange pull of it when the night grew quiet. One afternoon she stumbled while carrying a bucket of water from the stream. Her wrists, still raw from the leather thongs, ached with every movement, and the bucket tipped, spilling its contents into the dirt. Laughter rippled from a group of women nearby. Clara dropped to her knees, fumbling to scoop the bucket back up, heat burning her cheeks. Then a shadow fell over her. She looked up, and there he was. The warrior. He didn't speak. He didn't scold. Instead, he crouched, steadying the bucket, with one strong hand. For the briefest moment, their eyes met. His were dark, unreadable, yet not unkind. He lifted the bucket as though it weighed nothing, then set it back into her trembling hands. Without a word, he walked away, leaving Clara's heart pounding louder than the war drum she sometimes heard at night. The women who had laughed fell silent. Their glances shifted between Clara and the warriors retreating back, whispers hissing, like snakes in the grass. Clara understood then that his small act of mercy had not gone unnoticed, and in this place, where she was already despised, his attention was a dangerous thing. That night, as she lay awake in the tent, Clara thought of his face lit by firelight, the strength in his hands, the quiet in his gaze. She hated herself for it. This man was her captor, part of the raiding party that had destroyed her family. He had stolen her from her mother's arms. Why then did her chest ache with something more than fear when she thought of him? The answer lay deep within the warrior himself. His name was Tahu. Among his people, he was known as a fierce hunter and loyal fighter, one whose spear had tasted the blood of enemies many times. He was respected, admired, envied. And yet, something gnawed at him in silence. His marriage, though honorable, was strained. His wife was proud and strong, but their bond was born of arrangement, not choice. Affection had never taken root between them, only duty. When Clara was brought into the camp, bound and frightened, Tahu told himself she was nothing more than another prisoner. But each time her blue eyes lifted, filled with defiance even through her fear. Something stirred in him that he could not name. He tried to ignore it. He sat farther from her. He spoke to her only when necessary, and even then in words she did not understand. But his silence betrayed him. His gaze lingered longer than it should. And when he helped her at the stream, he knew every soul in the camp had seen it. Whispers followed him now, just as they followed her. His wife's eyes grew colder by the day. And though Tahu remained outwardly unchanged, his face a mask of stone, his voice steady, inside him, the storm was already beginning. Clara, too, felt it. She told herself she hated him, but in the darkness of her thoughts, when the loneliness grew unbearable, it was his silent gaze she remembered, not the cruelty of the raid. And neither of them yet realized how dangerous that silent bond would become. The prairie winds carried whispers, and in a village where every fire was shared, no secret stayed hidden for long. Clara had not been in the camp more than a few weeks before she noticed how the eyes of the women followed her. Some looked at her with open contempt, others with curiosity, but there was one gaze that burned hotter than all the rest. The gaze of Tahu's wife. Her name was Ayoka. She was tall, with proud cheekbones and long, braided hair that gleamed like polished obsidian. Her presence commanded respect among the women, not just because she was wife to one of the tribe's fiercest warriors, but because she was clever and sharp-tongued. Few dared cross her, and fewer still escaped the sting of her words if they did. At first, Ayoka had paid Clara little mind. A white prisoner was nothing new, an enemy to be ransomed, traded, or kept as servant. But she had seen something others might have missed, the way Tahu's gaze lingered too long on the pale-skinned woman. He had never looked at her, his wife, in such a way, not with that quiet, searching softness that was impossible to mistake. Ayoka's heart twisted with jealousy, not because she deeply loved her husband, for truth be told, theirs was a marriage, bound by duty rather than passion, but because she would not be shamed. She would not have the camp whispering that a stranger, a prisoner, had stolen the heart of one of their proudest warriors. The first sign came when she approached Clara's tent one morning. Clara had just woken, her hair tangled, her dress worn, thin from weeks of use. She was kneeling, trying to braid the strands back from her face when the flap of the tent was pulled aside. Ayoka entered without asking. For a long moment, she said nothing, only studied Clara with sharp, assessing eyes. Then, in broken English she had learned from traders, she hissed, "You think you are special? You are nothing here." Clara froze, startled that this woman, this fierce beauty who already seemed untouchable, could speak her tongue. But before she could answer, Ayoka leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "He looks at you. I see it. But you will not take him from me. Do you understand?" Clara swallowed hard, words stuck in her throat. She wanted to protest, to cry that she had no intention of taking anything, but she knew how useless that would be. Instead, she lowered her eyes and nodded, if only to end the confrontation. Ayoka left as swiftly as she had come, her braids swaying like a whip behind her. But suspicion, once rooted, only grew. Every gesture became fuel for her jealousy. When Tahu returned from a hunt and handed Clara a piece of venison before anyone else, Ayoka's eyes narrowed. When Clara stumbled carrying wood and Tahu silently helped her rise, Ayoka's lips pressed into a thin, furious line. Each kindness, no matter how small, was another stone added to the weight crushing her heart. Soon, she began to speak in whispers among the women. "She thinks she is better than us with her pale skin," she would say. "She smiles at him when no one is watching. She tempts him like a snake." The words spread like dry grass catching flame. Where once Clara was merely an oddity, she was now painted as a threat. Women who had pitied her now spat in the dirt when she passed. Children who once laughed with harmless curiosity now called her names she could not understand but knew were cruel. Clara felt the shift but did not understand its source. She could not know that the root of it all was Ayoka's growing rage, her fear of being humiliated in her own people's eyes. One night, as the fire crackled low and the camp settled into uneasy sleep, Ayoka confronted Tahu. "You shame me," she snapped, her voice like a whip in the dark. He looked at her evenly, saying nothing. "You think I do not see? You watch her. You help her. Do you think the others do not notice? They whisper, 'Tahu.' They laugh behind my back. My husband, the great warrior, with eyes only for a white prisoner." Tahu's jaw tightened, but still he said nothing. Her rage boiled hotter at his silence. If you do not stop, I will make the council see what you are, and they will not forgive you. With that, she turned sharply and left him in the shadows, her braid swaying like a serpent's tail. Tahu remained still, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had not spoken his heart aloud, not to Clara, not to anyone, but already the truth was spreading like wildfire. His silence had betrayed him more than any words could. And in the heart of the camp, Ayoka's suspicion had become something darker, vengeance waiting to strike. For Clara, the passing of days blurred into a rhythm both strange and unyielding. At first, every moment in the camp was torture. The people's voices were sharp and unfamiliar, their customs bewildering, their stares unbearable. She was watched constantly, treated like both curiosity and trespasser. Yet slowly, so slowly she barely noticed, her world began to shift. It began with the work. Prisoner though she was, idleness was not permitted. Each dawn, the women of the camp stirred to life, tending fires, grinding corn, stretching hides. Clara was made to carry water, fetch wood, and help with food. At first her hands blistered, her back ached, and she cried in silence, aching for her mother's embrace. But necessity is the harshest teacher. Soon she learned the quickest way, to balance a bucket on her hip, the right rhythm for pounding corn so her arms did not tire too quickly. She learned how to strip meat thin and hang it to dry, how to weave reeds into mats that could hold against wear. It was humiliating at first, but there was also a strange strength in it. Clara had never worked so hard in her life back east, where her mother had shielded her from true hardship. Now her palms were raw, her muscles sore, but each night she realized she had survived another day. She was not as fragile as she had once believed. The food, too, was strange. The first time they handed her a roasted grasshopper, she gagged, refusing to touch it. Laughter erupted around the fire, the women mocking her weakness. Hunger, however, does not leave room for pride. Within a week, Clara was eating what they ate: buffalo meat cooked over flames, acorn mush, strips of dried fish, and yes, grasshoppers crisped until they snapped like nuts between her teeth. She did not love it, but it sustained her, and she learned to chew with stoic silence. Language was the greatest barrier. Their words were sounds she could not untangle, yet she began to notice patterns. A word repeated when children fell: pain. Another when fire burned too low: wood. And another still when someone beckoned her: come. She whispered them to herself at night, her tongue stumbling but determined. The turning point came when a child fell near the stream. Clara, carrying a bucket, dropped it and rushed forward. The little girl had scraped her knee on a stone, her cries sharp and panicked. Clara tore a strip of cloth from her hem, dipped it in water, and pressed it gently to the child's wound. The girl blinked through tears, startled into silence. When Clara glanced up, several women had stopped their work, watching her. There was no laughter this time, only quiet study. She realized with a start that in their eyes she had done something acceptable. Human. Not all moments were so kind. Some women, spurred by Ayoka's whispers, found ways to humiliate her. Once her bowl of food was deliberately kicked into the dirt. Another time a pail of water was tipped over just as she bent to lift it, soaking her dress in icy wetness. She bore it all silently, forcing herself not to weep. Tears, she had learned, only fueled their scorn. And then there was Tahu. He never spoke to her in ways she could understand. Yet he became a silent thread woven through her days. When her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, she sometimes felt his eyes on her, steady and unreadable. Once he corrected the way she tied a bundle of sticks, showing her with his own hands the method that would keep the load balanced. He did not linger, but she noticed the others watching, their whispers rising like smoke. Clara felt torn in two. Part of her hated him for being the reason she was here at all, for being part of the raid that destroyed her family's life. But another, part one she tried to bury, was grateful for the small mercies he showed her. In a place where cruelty was easy, his quiet act set him apart. At night, lying in her tent, Clara thought of both worlds. She thought of her mother's gentle lullabies, the smell of apple pies cooling on wooden windowsills, the hymns sung on Sunday mornings. And she thought, too, of the drum beats that throbbed through this camp, the painted dancers moving like fire, the sharp scent of sage smoke curling into the sky. It was as though she stood with one foot in each world, belonging to neither. The tribe still saw her as an outsider, and she knew she could never truly become one of them. Yet she could no longer deny that pieces of their life had seeped into her blood. The work, the food, the words. These things tethered her to survival here. And in that space between hatred and adaptation, Clara began to understand what she had once thought impossible. That she could endure. But endurance was only the beginning. Love, though she did not yet recognize it, was already stirring in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was wide and blue, stretched endless over the plains, and the next it had turned black with rolling clouds that cracked open with lightning. The wind whipped across the camp, tearing loose hides from the lodges, sending fires sputtering into ash. Women shouted, children cried, and warriors rushed to tether horses before they bolted into the storm. Clara, who had been fetching water, struggled against the fierce gusts. Rain stung her face like needles as she stumbled back toward her tent. But before she reached it, a sudden gale ripped the structure apart, poles crashing into the mud, hides flapping into darkness. She stood drenched and trembling, clutching her arms around herself as the storm swallowed what little shelter she had. A strong hand seized her arm. She spun, startled, but it was him, Tahu. His hair, soaked and plastered against his face, gleamed in the flashes of lightning. He didn't speak, only pulled her firmly toward one of the larger lodges that still stood against the storm. She resisted for only a heartbeat before realizing she had no choice. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of wet hides and smoke. Shadows danced across the walls as the fire sputtered low, casting the place in dim, flickering light. Clara's breath came fast, her soaked dress clinging to her skin as she knelt near the flames. Her teeth chattered, and she could feel her whole body trembling from cold and fear. Tahu crouched beside the fire, feeding it bits of wood until the flames leapt higher. He glanced at her once, then again, his expression unreadable. Finally, he pulled a heavy blanket from a pile in the corner and held it out. Clara hesitated. Accepting anything from him felt dangerous, yet the cold gnawed at her bones, and pride was a luxury she could not afford. She reached for it, fingers brushing his for the briefest instant. Heat shot through her hand, startling her more than the storm. She quickly wrapped herself, lowering her eyes, but the spark lingered. The storm raged on. Rain hammered the lodge roof and thunder rolled so close it shook the ground. Hours passed, and still they remained together, silent except for the crackle of the fire. Clara tried to steady her thoughts, but she could not escape the strangeness of the moment. Here she was, captive among strangers, trapped in the storm with the very man who had helped take her from her family. She wanted to hate him. She had every right to hate him. But when her eyes lifted, just once, and met his across the fire, she felt something else entirely. His gaze was steady, dark as the storm, but there was no cruelty in it. Instead, there was a softness that unraveled her resolve. It was the same look she had seen in fleeting moments. The stream, the woodpile, the firelight. But here alone it was stronger, more undeniable. For the first time, Clara spoke his name. Tahu, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. His eyes widened slightly, as if surprised to hear her lips form the sound. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate, acknowledging her. She didn't know what else to say. Words tangled on her tongue, English useless, his language still foreign. But she didn't need words. In the silence, something passed between them, a current, invisible but undeniable. When the wind howled so violently the lodge shuddered, Clara startled, clutching the blanket tighter. Instinctively, Tahu reached out, his hand brushing her shoulder. He didn't pull her close, didn't take advantage. He simply let his touch linger long enough to tell her she wasn't alone. The contact was brief, But it was enough. Enough to set her heart racing, enough to leave her cheeks burning hotter than the fire. She wanted to pull away, but she didn't. And he, though he could have closed the space between them, chose restraint. The storm finally broke near dawn. The winds softened, the thunder drifted into the distance, and the rain slowed to a weary drizzle. The camp stirred with cautious relief, people emerging to assess the damage. But inside that lodge, Clara and Tahu remained for a few lingering moments. The fire had burned low, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, his presence steady beside her. Nothing more had happened. No words of love. No stolen kiss. Yet both of them knew something had changed forever. When Clara stepped outside, at last the sky pale with the first light of morning. The camp bustled around her as though nothing had shifted, but she felt the truth deep in her bones. Something forbidden had begun that night in the storm, something that would not be easily buried. And though she didn't see her, Ayoka had been awake through the storm too. She had noticed her husband's absence from their lodge, and she had begun to suspect exactly where he had been. Ayoka had always been proud. She was not only the wife of Tahu, one of the tribe's fiercest hunters, but also the daughter of a respected elder. All her life she had carried herself with the poise of a woman who knew her place in the village was secure. Yet pride is a fragile thing, easily cracked by whispers and stolen glances. And now, it was breaking under the weight of humiliation. She had seen it in his eyes. She had seen the way Tahu looked at the white prisoner, not as a man should look at a captive, but as though he carried a secret inside him. At first Ayoka dismissed it as pity, an indulgence of a kind heart. But when the storm came and Tahu did not return to their lodge, her suspicions hardened into certainty. The next morning, as the camp gathered to repair storm damage, she watched Clara step out of a neighboring lodge, a blanket still draped around her shoulders. The blanket was one from her husband's own store. Ayoka's jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The shame of it burned hotter than fire. The others would see it too. They would whisper that her husband had chosen a prisoner over his wife. Her pride could not bear it. That evening, when the women gathered to grind corn and mend hides, Ayoka began to speak. Her voice was calm at first, but sharp as a knife hidden in cloth. "You see how she walks," she said, nodding toward Clara, who carried wood on her back. "She thinks she is one of us now, but she is poison. She will bring ruin into this camp." The women leaned closer, their hands stilling on their work. Ayoka lowered her voice. "She has already ensnared my husband. Do you not see? He watches her when he thinks no one notices. He gives her kindness when she deserves none. And now, even in the storm, he was gone from my side. Where was he? With her." A murmur rippled through the circle. Some frowned, some shook their heads. But the seed was planted. By the time the fire burned low, it had taken root. The whispers spread like smoke. Clara felt it before she understood it. The women who once ignored her now shoved her when she passed, sneering as they muttered words she couldn't translate, but knew carried venom. Her water bucket was overturned deliberately. Her meager portions of food were cut smaller. Children mocked her more openly. Emboldened by their mother's scorn, Clara didn't know the source of this sudden cruelty, but she felt its sting in every corner of the camp. Only when she caught Ayoka's eyes, cold, triumphant, unyielding, did she begin to understand. Meanwhile, Ayoka's words slithered beyond the women's circle, finding their way into the ears of men. Around the council fire, some of the younger warriors began to mutter that Tahu had been bewitched, that his honor was tarnished by his softness toward the white woman. Older men listened in silence, their brows furrowed, their respect for Tahu shadowed by unease. One night, Ayoka confronted him directly. "You dishonor me," she spat as he entered their lodge. "You dishonor our people." Tahu remained silent, his face unreadable. "Do not think I am blind," she continued, her voice rising. "You look at her as though she belongs to you. You bring her food. You shelter her when storms come. The others see it, Tahu. They whisper, they laugh at me. His eyes flickered, but he did not deny it. His silence was worse than confession. Fury surged in her chest. If you choose her, I will make the elders see. They will not forgive you for betraying your wife and shaming your people. You will be cast out, and she will not save you. Her words hung heavy in the air, sharp as a blade drawn between them. But Tahu only turned his gaze to the fire, as if the flames might answer for him. His silence, his calm, his refusal to fight back, it enraged her all the more. Ayoka left the lodge, her breath ragged with fury. In her heart, something snapped. This was no longer just about jealousy. It was about vengeance. If the council would not act on whispers alone, she would see to it they had reason. The very next day, as the camp gathered for the evening meal, Ayoka stood before the people, her voice rising above the crackle of the fire. Look at him, she cried, pointing toward her husband. Look at Tahu, our warrior, our protector. He is no longer ours. His heart is gone. It belongs to her. Gasps rose from the circle. All eyes turned toward Clara, who froze, a piece of meat trembling in her hand. Her heart thundered in her chest as the camp's gaze burned into her like 1,000 arrows. Ayoka's voice shook with fury, but also triumph. Do you want this? A woman of pale skin stealing the strength of one of our own? Will you let him shame us all? Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of fire and the low rumble of thunder still distant on the horizon. In that moment, the betrayal was complete. Ayoka had not only turned the women against Clara, she had poisoned the entire camp against Tahu. And though she did not know what the council would decide, she knew one truth with certainty. She had struck the blow that might end them both. The air in the camp had grown heavy, thick with suspicion and whispers. Clara could feel it pressing against her skin every time she stepped outside her lodge. Children no longer played near her. Women turned their backs when she passed, and the men, those fierce warriors who once regarded her as nothing but an oddity, now looked at her with something darker in their eyes. Distrust, resentment. She did not know the words being spoken, but she understood the tones, the pointed gestures, the narrowing of eyes in her direction. And when Ayoka stood before the people and cast her accusation like a spear into the heart of the fire, Clara felt the shift. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was the cause of shame. She was the wedge driving through the heart of the tribe. It did not take long before the elders summoned Tahu. The trial was to be held at dusk, as the sun melted into the horizon and the fire in the center of the camp roared high enough to cast every face in sharp relief. The entire village gathered. Warriors sat with arms crossed, their expressions hard. Women clustered together, whispering behind hands. Children clung to their mothers, wide-eyed, sensing the weight of something dangerous. Clara was dragged forward and made to kneel near the fire, her wrists bound once more as they had been when she first arrived. The heat licked her face and she felt sweat drip down her temple, but the fire was nothing compared to the fear coursing through her veins. Tahu stood on the opposite side of the flames. His head was high, shoulders squared, but Clara saw the storm in his eyes. The eldest of the council, a man named Waya, rose to speak. His voice was deep and steady, carrying across the circle. Though Clara could not understand every word, she felt the gravity in each syllable. He gestured to her, then to Tahu, then back to Ayoka, who stood tall with her chin raised, her eyes gleaming with bitter triumph. The accusations poured like oil onto the flames, that Tahu had betrayed his wife, that his loyalty to the tribe was compromised, that his heart had been bewitched by the pale-skinned woman. Some argued she was a curse sent to weaken them. Others said she must be put to death to restore balance. Clara's chest tightened with terror. Her eyes darted around the circle, searching for a single sympathetic face, but found none. She wanted to scream, to beg, to tell them she had never asked for this, never wanted their warrior's gaze, never wished to cause this chaos. But her tongue was tied by fear and by the barrier of language. Then the firelight shifted, and Tahu stepped forward. He did not rush. He did not shout. His voice, when it came, was low but carried through the silence with the weight of stone. He spoke in his people's tongue, his words slow, deliberate. Though Clara could not understand them, she could read his face. He was not denying. He was not groveling. He was standing as if he had nothing to hide. A ripple moved through the crowd. Gasps, murmurs. Some scowled, some looked away, and others stared as though unable to believe what they heard. Clara's heart hammered. What had he said? Waya raised his hand, silencing the crowd. He turned to the council and they spoke. Among themselves, their voices overlapping, sharp and urgent. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Waya stood again and declared something that sent the camp into stunned silence. All eyes turned to Tahu. Then slowly, they turned to Clara. The elder's words rang in the air, incomprehensible to her, but the meaning struck her like thunder when one of the younger warriors sneered at her in broken English. He must choose. Choose. Her stomach dropped. She understood now. They would not allow both women to remain bound to him. He must choose loyalty to his wife and his people, or choose the prisoner. Clara felt the weight of the fires glow against her back, the eyes of the entire camp burning into her skin. She looked at Tahu, searching his face, silently pleading. She did not want him to choose her, not if it meant death or exile. She wanted him to live, and yet, selfishly, terribly, she also wanted him to see her, truly see her. Ayoka's eyes glittered with fierce certainty. She believed she knew his answer. She was his wife, his duty, his honor. No man would forsake his people for a captive. But as the fire cracked and the sky above darkened into indigo, Clara saw the flicker in Tahu's gaze. It was not the look of a man cowed by duty. It was the look of a man on the edge of an impossible choice. And though no one yet knew it, his decision would split the silence of the camp like lightning tearing across the night. The fire roared higher as the night deepened, casting wild shadows across the circle of faces. Every man, woman, and child leaned forward, their breaths caught in the heat of expectation. The air was thick with smoke and judgment. Clara's heart thudded painfully, each beat echoing like a drum of fate. She could not understand all the words spoken around her, but she understood enough. This moment would decide everything. Tahu stood tall, shoulders square, his face solemn. On one side of the fire, Ayoka glared at him with cold, unyielding fury. On the other side, Clara knelt, bound and trembling, fear and hope battling in her wide eyes. The elder Waya's command lingered in the air. Choose. For a long while, silence pressed down over the camp, broken only by the crackle of flames and the occasional restless shift of a warrior's stance. Tahu's gaze swept over his people, the tribe he had hunted for, bled for, defended all his life. These were his brothers and sisters. This was his blood. To stand against them was to sever himself from everything he had ever known. And yet, when his eyes landed on Clara, something inside him stirred that he could not deny. He remembered the first time he had looked at her, fearful, defiant, her pale skin and foreign eyes strange, yet arresting. He remembered the night she had huddled alone by the fire, her body shivering not just from the cold but from the weight of isolation. And he remembered how something in him, something buried deep, had cracked open. She was more than a prisoner. She was the reminder that his heart still beat with something greater than duty. She had awakened in him a tenderness he had thought long dead, a dangerous yearning for a life beyond the confines of tradition. He closed his eyes for a breath, then opened them again, resolute. When he spoke, his voice cut through the night like the draw of a blade. The words fell heavy, clear, undeniable. Though Clara could not understand their language, she felt them reverberate through her bones. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Warriors surged to their feet. Women clutched their mouths. Even the fire seemed to snap and spark in protest. Clara's breath caught. What had he said? She searched his eyes, desperate, and in that moment she knew. He had chosen her. The weight of it slammed into her chest. Relief and terror warred inside her. He had risked everything, his honor, his home, his very place among his people for her, and though a part of her longed to weep with gratitude, Another part recoiled in fear. What would this choice cost him? Ayoka screamed. It was not the scream of a woman merely betrayed, but of a queen stripped of her crown. Her face contorted, with rage as she rushed forward, pointing at Clara with venomous fury. She bewitched him, she shrieked in her tongue. She has poisoned his heart. He is no longer one of us, he is lost. The circle erupted into chaos. Warriors shouted, elders argued, women wailed. Some demanded Tahu be cast out immediately. Others cried for Clara's blood to break the spell. The council tried to restore order, but the fire of fury was already spreading too fast through it all. Tahu stood unmoving, a wall of resolve against the storm. His eyes never left Clara's. At last, Waya raised his staff and thundered for silence. Slowly, grudgingly, the voices fell. The elder's face was carved from stone as he declared judgment. If he chooses her, Waya said, his voice deep and final, then he chooses exile. No man who turns from his people may remain among them. His path is severed. His blood is no longer ours. A hush swept through the camp. Tahu did not flinch. He bowed his head once, as if acknowledging a truth, long inevitable. Clara's heart shattered. He was giving up everything, his tribe, his kin, his identity for her, and she knew with aching clarity that he might one day hate her for it. But when he crossed the fire to her side and cut her bonds with his knife, his touch was steady. He pulled her to her feet, his hand lingering on hers just a moment longer than necessary, as though to anchor them both against the rising storm. Gasps and mutters followed them. Ayoka collapsed to her knees, her cries tearing through the night. The tribe stared in silence, some with rage, others with disbelief, a few with pity. But none dared stop him. Together Tahu and Clara stepped away from the fire, away from the circle, into the darkness of the night. Behind them, the camp seethed with betrayal and fury. Before them lay only uncertainty, the open plains, the dangers of exile, and a love that had already cost more than either of them had ever imagined. And yet, in that moment, as the flames shrank behind them, Clara felt a strange and terrible truth settle in her heart. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was the reason a man had chosen love over everything he had ever known. The night swallowed them whole as Tahu led Clara away from the camp. Behind them, the fire still glowed, its crackling embers like angry eyes watching them depart. The cries of Ayoka and the muttering of the tribe lingered in Clara's ears, long after they faded into the distance. She stumbled once on the uneven ground, but Tahu caught her arm, steadying her with a grip both gentle and unyielding. Neither spoke at first. For Tahu, words felt like ashes on his tongue. Everything that had defined him, his home, his people, his place among them, had been ripped away in one heartbeat. For Clara, silence was safer than voicing the storm of guilt and gratitude inside her. At dawn they reached a ridge overlooking the plains. The sky burned gold and red, a vast canvas that seemed almost mocking in its beauty. Tahu stopped there, scanning the horizon with a hunter's eye. The land stretched endlessly, rolling grasses, distant forests, jagged mountains etched against the morning light. It was freedom, yes, but also exile. Clara sank onto a rock, exhausted. Her wrists were raw from the ropes, her feet blistered, her body weary. Yet it was not her body that weighed her down most, it was her heart. She looked at Tahu standing tall against the sunrise and whispered almost to herself, "You gave up everything." He turned to her. For a long time he said nothing. Then, in slow, careful English, the little he knew, he answered, "Not everything." His gaze held hers, steady, fierce, a vow hidden inside it. But the road of exile was no gentle path. That first week they faced hunger. Without the tribe's stores, they had only what Tahu could hunt with his bow and what roots and berries Clara could help gather under his guidance. Nights grew bitterly cold. Clara shivered beneath the thin blanket Tahu had managed to take, and though he gave her most of its warmth, she saw how his own body trembled in the darkness. Danger stalked them as well. Lone riders roamed the plains, men with no loyalty, but to greed. Twice Tahu had to shield Clara as strangers passed nearby, their eyes too curious, their laughter too sharp. Each time Tahu's hand hovered near his knife, his body taut as a drawn bowstring until the danger passed. Yet it was not only the world outside they had to battle. Inside, doubts festered. Clara carried guilt like a stone in her chest. At night, when Tahu's steady breathing signaled his sleep, she lay awake and wondered. Had she ruined him? Had she torn him from the only life he had ever known? He had chosen her, yes, but had he chosen her freely? Or had her presence twisted his heart until he could no longer see clearly? Tahu too wrestled with his own shadows. He dreamed of the campfires, the laughter of brothers in arms, the songs of his people. He saw his father's face, proud and stern, and his mother's hands, weaving patterns into his childhood clothes. Each memory was a knife turning in his chest. Yet when he woke and found Clara watching him with wide, uncertain eyes, he forced the pain back down. She could not see the cracks. He had made his choice. He would not let her bear the burden of regret. And yet, despite the hardship, something began to bloom between them. One evening, after Tahu had brought down a deer, Clara insisted on helping him prepare the meat. Her hands were clumsy, unused to the blade, but he guided her patiently, their fingers brushing. She laughed softly at her own awkwardness, and for the first time in weeks he smiled. Not the small, guarded smile of duty, but a true one, warm and unrestrained. Another night, as the wind howled and they huddled close for warmth, Clara whispered stories of her childhood, of apple orchards and summer fairs, of her mother's singing voice, and the books she once read by candlelight. Tahu listened in silence, his dark eyes fixed on her face as though he were drinking in every word. When she finished, he shared in halting English a memory of his own. Chasing wild horses as a boy, the wind so fierce it nearly carried him away. Slowly, painfully, they built a fragile bridge between their worlds. Still, the shadow of exile loomed. They could not linger in one place for long. Supplies ran thin, dangers grew thicker, and the horizon stretched endlessly. Clara began to wonder if they were merely running from death, rather than toward a life. One night, as they camped beneath a sky crowded with stars, Clara turned to him and whispered the fear she had long swallowed. What if we don't survive this? Tahu was silent for a long moment. Then he placed his hand over hers, rough and steady. Then we fight, he said simply. Together. The word struck deep in Clara's heart. Together. It was a promise. A vow. A shield against despair. And as the wind swept across the plains and the fire flickered low, Clara realized something astonishing. For the first time since her capture, since her life had been torn apart, she no longer felt like a prisoner. She felt like a partner. The exile's road was hard, uncertain, and perilous, but it was theirs. The seasons shifted as Tahu and Clara pressed on. The grass of the plains grew tall and golden, swaying like waves under the autumn sun. Days blurred into nights, each step carrying them farther from the tribe and deeper into the unknown. Yet no matter how far they walked, the memory of the fire, the circle of faces, and the weight of exile followed them like a shadow. Clara often caught Tahu staring into the horizon, his expression unreadable, as if the wind carried whispers from the camp he had left behind. One evening, after weeks of wandering, they came upon a ridge that overlooked a valley. Below, a river carved silver lines through the earth, and wild horses grazed in the fading light. Clara gasped softly at the sight. It was beautiful, untouched, a place that seemed like it belonged only to them. Here? She asked, her voice tentative. Tahu studied the valley with a hunter's eye, then nodded once. It was fertile, sheltered, far from the reach of raiders and soldiers alike. Here, perhaps, they could carve a life. Together, they built what they could. Tahu fashioned a shelter from branches and hides. Clara learned to weave grasses into mats, to grind roots into flour. Their hands grew calloused, their backs ached, but with each passing day the valley became less a place of exile and More a fragile home. Still, silence lingered between them at times. Silence heavy with what had been lost. Clara could not forget the look on Ahyoka's face, the devastation of a woman betrayed before her people. And Tahu could not forget the brothers he once hunted alongside, the elders whose wisdom had guided him since boyhood. That silence broke. One evening when Clara found him seated by the river, staring into the current. She sat beside him, the air cool and damp. "You miss them," she said softly. He did not deny it. "They are my blood," he replied in halting English. Then, after a pause, he added, "But you are my heart." Her chest tightened at the words. She reached for his hand and he let her take it. For the first time, she felt not guilt for his sacrifice, but a fierce pride. He had chosen not from weakness, but from strength. And though the tribe might see it as betrayal, Clara knew it for what it was, love in its most dangerous, most powerful form. But the tribe had not forgotten them. Late in winter, when snow dusted the valley, riders appeared on the ridge. Clara's breath froze in her chest as she saw the figures silhouetted against the sky. Warriors of the tribe, their horses restless, their spears gleaming. Tahu rose slowly, his bow in hand but lowered, his body taut as a coiled spring. The riders descended. At their head was Waya, the elder whose judgment had severed Tahu's bloodline. His eyes were grave as he dismounted, his breath fogging in, the cold. Behind him, other warriors watched, their faces unreadable. Clara's heart pounded. She moved closer to Tahu, bracing for violence. But none came. Instead, Waya stepped forward and spoke in their tongue. His words rolled steady, ancient as the land. Tahu listened in silence, his face carved of stone. When the elder finished, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Then Tahu answered, firm, unyielding, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Clara could not understand the exchange, but she felt its gravity. The elder nodded once, then turned. The warriors mounted their horses, and without a word they rode away, their figures shrinking against the white horizon. Only silence remained. Clara turned to Tahu, desperate. "What did they say?" For a long time he did not answer. Then finally he spoke. "They will not take us back, but they will not come again." The relief that washed through Clara was dizzying. No blood had been spilled. No arrows had flown. The tribe had passed judgment one final time, not with death but with silence. That night, as the snow fell softly over their valley, Clara lay beside Tahu and stared at the fire. She thought of the tribe, of Ahyoka, of the circle around the flames. She thought of exile, of hunger, of fear. And then she thought of this, a man who had chosen her when choosing her meant losing everything else. The silence of the tribe was not acceptance nor forgiveness. It was a severing, a void that could never be filled. Yet within that silence, Clara and Tahu had found something else, a life no one could take from them, a love forged in fire and exile, stronger than the voices of judgment. As dawn broke and the valley glowed gold once more, Clara knew the truth with a clarity that pierced her soul. They had not been destroyed by exile. They had been remade. The tribe's silence would echo forever. But so would their love.